thank you so much to the other keynote speakers. You guys have really inspired me. I'm really glad I got to hear what you had to say before I gave mine. I think it gives a lot more meaning to what I'm about to say. My name is Haben Ghebregergish, and I am a math educator at the High School for Recording Arts in St. Paul, Minnesota. I went to public schools in St. Paul from kindergarten to middle school, but my story starts thousands of miles from there. I was born in Eritrea, an East African country with a population of 6 million, and immigrated to the United States at 5 years old, along with my parents and my younger brother. My parents grew up during a violent civil war that would go on until the year I was born. My dad, who grew up in a tiny village, stopped going to school in 8th grade as a result of the fighting. My mother, a city girl, was lucky enough to finish high school, but never got to pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. My parents' educational pursuits were cut short, but they had greater hopes for their children. As I grew up, my parents instilled in me that we came to the United States for educational and economic opportunities, as well as political freedom, not because we didn't want to be Eritrean anymore. They taught me to love my Eritrean culture, my unblemished cocoa skin that did so well in the sun, my metamorphic hair capable of taking on any hairstyle, my distinct ability to learn new things quickly, and all my other unique qualities. I'm grateful because my self-love and self-adoration would be challenged living in America. As a child of immigrants, I learned how to do a lot of things at an early age in order to help my parents. I completed government forms, helped them study for their citizenship tests so that I could become a citizen, and translated during phone calls to ask some company why they kept raising our bills. And I still do it now. Like so many emerging bilingual learners, I had a symbiotic relationship with my parents. I needed them for food, shelter, and protection, but they also needed me. I showed deference to adults, but in so many ways I was fiercely independent and an amazing critical thinker. But as a black nerdy girl, I struggled to fit in, even at my racially and ethnically homogeneous or diverse elementary school. The kids used to call me Oreo. Black on the outside, white on the inside. I heard that one before? So you know, because only white people can be smart and articulate, I guess. That was the point. So building my self-love and self-confidence was even harder when my parents moved us out to the mainly white city of Eagan, Minnesota, where I was the only black kid in almost every room I entered. Feeling disconnected socially, I threw myself into my studies. As much as my parents wanted to help, I don't think they understood what it meant to grow up black in America and how hard it was to form a healthy relationship with oneself in this context. I think every black child struggles with this, even those doing well academically in school, and that's something I did. For me, school was a place where I could challenge my intellect. In high school, I excelled. I took advanced placement classes, traveled all over the country with my debate team, and performed as a flautist in my wind ensemble. I'm grateful for every teacher I had, but looking back, I realized that I learned a lot of bad ideas about who matters most and whose stories should be centered. School challenged my intellect, but I never got to learn about myself. The experiences and perspectives of people who look like me were rarely on display. So, when I was accepted into the University of Chicago, one of the most prestigious colleges in the country, I was astounded. I never heard of anyone that looked like myself, a child of immigrants who didn't even speak English when she started kindergarten, getting that kind of opportunity, and I was petrified. I spent the entire summer before freshman year of college reading as many books as I could to keep up with my future classmates, who I envisioned as all being far more intelligent than I was. These insecurities, in fact, had no basis in reality, and I, in fact, continued to prove myself wrong. At the end of my first year, my advisor sat me down and told me I was one of only 7 freshman girls to finish the year with a 4.0 in a class of 1,500. So for the next 3 years, I was still full of self-doubt. Because I wasn't exposed to black excellence in school, it was hard to acknowledge my own, and I'm still healing from that. I'm a teacher because I believe schools have a duty to help students, particularly our BIPOC students, to build self-love, self-confidence, and self-worth, as much, if not more, than they need to prepare them in the academic areas. And I realized that the way we teach the latter impacts the former. What I've noticed about implementing deeper learning in my context is that in order for teachers to connect the academic and the social-emotional, they must be familiar with their students' contexts and recognize that students are learning all the time. In the summer of 2020, after the horrific police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I understood that we were all learning even though school was not in session. Whether they saw George's murder on social media or refused to be a witness, whether they actively protested to ensure that the police responsible were held accountable or watched it on Facebook Live, whether they saw burned images or images of burned buildings on their phone or out of the window of their homes, all of our students learned that summer. As a teacher, the murder of George Floyd and all the countless police killings that have preceded and followed should make teachers wonder what their purpose is as an educator, what their duty is, and what they're offering to their students that will be relevant and empowering at this moment and in the future. I always hear this notion of respect in schools. Treat others like you want to be treated. But that assumes that students believe they're worthy of being treated in the highest esteem. And I wonder, what are schools doing to teach them that? So where do we start? The answer, I believe, starts by recognizing and honoring the experiences that students have outside the four walls of a classroom. Teachers can promote self-love and self-esteem by showing students that they care about them. Young people do not expect their teachers to know everything, but they want to know that their teachers will listen. And listening is where a culturally relevant pedagogy begins. One of the first questions I ask a new student is, what are you passionate and curious about? And sometimes I don't get a straight answer if the trust isn't there. But I can ask, where are you from? How was it like growing up there? What do you like to do for fun? How was your day? These questions are not time fillers or Unit 0 activities. They're essential to how you can effectively design your courses so that they serve your students. In classrooms at the High School for Recording Arts, students' experiences, passions, and learning styles determine what and how we learn. The students have the opportunity to make the level of choices that almost mirror what an executive team for a company might make. They help shape learning targets and how we get there. They regularly help determine what success looks like through rubrics and self-assessments. And this way completely undoes the traditional student-teacher dynamic. And it is necessary because in order for education to be relevant to students and transformative, students should be at the table from the beginning, not after the pacing guides, the standards, and the lesson plans have already been written. Thank you. It is imperative because we must end the myth that only the teacher owns the knowledge. When it comes to the creation and execution of policies surrounding issues like policing and economic development, we've started to go back to the question of who was at the table in the first place. Educators who want to be part of the fight for social justice should ask themselves the same question in their field. In these tumultuous times, teachers cannot be what many would call neutral. As educational philosopher Paulo Freire once said, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. So it is time to be bold. Teachers cannot be afraid of being too political because, frankly, everything is political. In these times, neutrality is a myth. Teachers must be willing to make spaces for students for them to discuss issues of power and inequity. They must create a safe space for students to share their own experiences and ask questions that may put our systems, including our educational system, on trial. In my mathematics classroom, our learning is often centered around critical issues like the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, growing wealth disparities, and the disproportionate impact of climate change on the poor and non-white. So I hope that as a deeper learning community, we can focus on building the capacity of our young people to solve the problems that they have inherited from previous generations: racism, widening wealth gaps, climate change, and so much more. We've learned over recent years that they have the will and the energy to take on these challenges, and we gotta pass the baton. I'm grateful for my education, but I wish that I had had the opportunity to dissect and challenge the systems that often made life harder for my family and made me feel inadequate and unworthy to take up space. I wish I had had a chance to learn about the countless changemakers like African-American mathematician Dorothy Vaughan, who was the director of a segregated computer programming department at NASA, and Georgiana R. Simpson, the first Black woman to earn a PhD at the University of Chicago, and was only one of 3 Black women to earn a doctorate in 1921. Women like them were slowly dismantling the unjust status quo by pursuing their greatness, and I believe they were hyper-aware of that. And because I now know about these changemakers, I'm hyper-aware of my role, and that fills me with pride. All of our students deserve this level of self-actualization as well. Thank you.